Hello and welcome back to CMO Confessions, powered by On24 and Esco Media. We're so excited to have you here. In this interview series, we talk with top marketing leaders to find out their biggest trends, pet peeves, as well as their confessions. I'm your host, Joe Escobedo, CEO and Chief Editor at Esco Media. Joining us today is a friend, TK Go, who is the Chief Customer Officer at Prudential Singapore. TK, thanks so much for being on the show.
Hi, Joe, and good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, to all your audience. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So excited to have you here. Now, TK, we've known each other for a long time, so we'll just dive right into a confession.
Please do that.
I'd love to hear about a time, or maybe a project that maybe didn't quite go to plan, but maybe there was an interesting learning off the back of that.
Yeah, I think quite a few things, but I'll just pick up one, which is a major digital initiatives. As we all know, I think to all the marketers out there, you soon realize that our life is very much intertwined with technology in the last couple of years. And many organizations talk about digitization, and definitely marketing comes into the scope as well. So I do remember one initiative a couple of years ago when digitization is really the crave. We embarked into something, obviously it's a fairly new thing to the marketing world as well. And things obviously didn't go as well. And when we actually look back and did a little bit of a root cause analysis, as they call it, right, to find out what actually happened, I think a lot goes back to clear ownership of the tasks, the project, and the right stakeholder management. And I think that's a big lesson. Right? I think it is a lesson for anything that we do in project management. But when it comes to something that's totally unfamiliar, especially in the area of technology and digitization, which marketing were starting to get into a couple of years ago, I think that importance, that lesson learned on really clear identification of who to talk to, the stakeholders that you need to manage was a big lesson for us.
Very interesting. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that who are managing larger projects, the bigger the project, the more people involved. We talk about different geographies and different departments. So I think that's good advice for everyone here. I'd also love to hear what gets you excited as a marketer. It could be a trend or something you're working on. I'd love to hear a bit more.
Yeah, I think this definitely will be something relevant to all the marketers out there. In some ways, in what we are doing, there is some sense of creativity, some sense of creating new things, right? Whether it's a new communication, a new video that we have done, new social media posts, or a new campaign. What spurs a lot of people on, especially creative people, is the ability to see your work out there in the streets, especially when it's appreciated by members of the public. So I think that really turns me on, that really gets me excited. If I'm out in the market and I see my activity in place, people are enjoying the experience, or people are enjoying the product I help to market, that brings me lots of satisfaction. And sometimes even if it's negative comments that I hear, take for example, most often or not, sometimes we may see our advertising in cinema. You're sitting in the dark, someone behind you could be just commenting on your work and say, oh, this advertising is crap, it's whatsoever. It hurts you, but at the same time, it is gratifying that you are receiving such comments, because I guess people notice and you actually take lessons real time, right, from what you do and try to just reflect and improve again on your next project.
That's got to be an interesting one, to be in the cinemas and see your work maybe come up at the beginning. And it's kind of like the YouTube comments in real life where someone's they're saying, hey, you know what, I didn't quite like this. Why are we still seeing these ads? And yeah, the fact that your creator is right behind you, it's got to be quite an experience.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I'm sure, Joe, you yourself is pretty much a marketer. You have experienced that many times, right? Even billboards, very traditional stuff that marketers used to do, billboards, simple things that it's an event and people may hate it, people may like it, but the fact that it's out there, enjoyed by the public, I think that's the part that really makes me very excited about what I do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The pros and cons of online and offline. I think offline, like I said, if it's an event, the billboard, or it's things like that, then you can see people interacting in it. With digital, it's a little bit more difficult. I think with the exception of if it's like an online event like this and there's people commenting, I think we've been very fortunate for the previous couple of sessions that we've been flooded with great questions from the audience. So that for me is a slightly different back is the engagement from the audience. Yeah, I'd love to hear both. And we've received mostly positive. I'm sure this one will get a lot of positive feedback as well, too.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about online feedback. I think that's where this is the community of marketeers, right? We all heard about keyboard warriors, sometimes even when you are online, because you're in some ways hidden by a little bit of abnormality because nobody sees you online in that sense, and comments can be a bit harsh. I think that's where sometimes we need to take comfort that A, we are not alone in receiving such comments, and B, sometimes those comments can be a bit harsher than what they meant to be. Don't take it personally, take it in a very objective sense and learn from it. I think it's a great way to test our own character and ability to sieve out real value in feedback through whatever comments that come to us online as well. And I think all of us, since we are all pretty much tapping onto all kinds of channels, including online channels, will also receive our fair share of sometimes nasty, harsh comments from members of the public. But I think that's fine. That's the nature of how it is right now. And we just need to brace ourselves for that.
Absolutely. I'm keen to hear because, like you said, some people, there'll be trolls who would naturally just put out nasty comments just for the sake of it, and they'll be positive. As a marketing leader, how do you weigh some of those positive and negative comments and then share that with the team and then implement it? Or is it just we take note of it, but then we don't really move on it? What's your approach to that?
Oh, wow. No hard and fast rule. I think those comments that come in as very constructive ones, definitely do act on it, do convey it and forward it to the right group of people within the company if it's not something within your direct care. As for the trolls, as for the harsh comments, I actually do believe sometimes they do have a purpose, a reason for voicing out those comments anyway. So as I said, sieve through it, filter through the emotions, I think. Yeah, I think that's very important. For the person that has typed it down and sent it across to us, probably something has triggered him or her personally. Just understand the reason behind it, get behind the facts. And if those are valid to pursue and follow up, I think it's right for us to just make sure that those feedback and complaints are being answered to. But take away the emotions, because sometimes those words can be all very emotional, but the value is, again, the reasons why they find certain things that we have come up with offensive to them or something that is not pleasant to them.
That's a good point. Is I think one is listening, like I said, to the sentiment, positive, negative, emotions behind it, and then peeling back the layers to say, okay, why might have they've commented in a particular way, and then maybe responding or maybe taking that, learning from that, and then applying it in different upcoming initiatives. So really good advice so far, TK. Really appreciate it. The other thing I want to get your thoughts on is a big announcement you guys have made in Straits Times. Huge news for the cycling world. Maybe you could share a little more about what the announcement is and how it came to be.
Wow, that's something that the team definitely is very excited with. In fact, in the whole Prudential community right now, we are all looking forward to the event that's happening at the end of October, 29th and 30th to be exact. For the very first time, we are working with the organizers, which is Evoque locally, and the IP owner of Tour de France in France itself, ASO Amari Sports organization, to bring a criterium format of Tour de France to Singapore. So this is the first in Southeast Asia. It will occupy a nice part of the CBD area, the Marina area, for slightly more than 2 days, all right, where we will see the top 32 cyclists in the world in Singapore racing their hearts out in a defined route around the marina. The latest I've seen, the plan is somewhere around the Padang as well for a duration of time. So that's the professional session. There will also be sessions that amateur cyclists can race as well. And across the 2 days, there will also be rides that are open to the community to participate in. Very important of all, this is not an event just for pure hardcore cyclists. We also want to make sure that everybody enjoy it as a festival. So there will be a concert thrown out as well during the 2 days. And hopefully we'll see some fantastic lineup. I think for us in Prudential, the importance of lining ourselves as the title sponsors of this event is that we are able to bring an activity, world-class standard activity to Singaporeans, to people living in Singapore, where they can participate, understand how it can help them to participate and be in the journey to lead a much healthier life. Yeah, so that's the very exciting thing that the team and I are working on for the last few months. But we're not waiting till October. From August onwards, hopefully we'll also be pushing out a few more engagement activities. We have a fantastic Park Connector network in Singapore. Those staying in Singapore will understand that. A long stretch that stretches across the country and also around the island itself for people to cycle on, to run. So those activities will actually encourage them with small little challenges, with some rewards at the end of it, to actually go around the different parts of the PCN or the Park Connector network and start enjoying cycling and start participating in some of the activities that we have.
That's huge news. I think first we had the F1, which was brand new to Singapore. Now we have the Tour de France. And it's a slightly different style. Like you said, for F1, not everyone can get behind a car and go 200 kilometers per hour, whatever it is. But anyone who has even a simple, cheap bike like I do can take part of their own way, like you said, around the park connectors. And I think it goes back to what Prudential kind of stands for, is that healthy lifestyle. So aligning it with an activity which is obviously world-class competition like this is a nice fit together. So yeah, kudos to you guys.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll see you in your spandex, yeah?
I don't think you want to see me in my spandex. I'm going to drop a few kilos first, maybe about 10 years ago, but we'll spare the audience from that this time.
No, maybe you should do a live feed when you're doing that.
That would be
a live feed. Yeah.
Stay tuned for that, folks. We'll see. TK, now I know this is obviously a massive event. You work with a bunch of different partners and agencies. And so a lot of folks who are listening who work with different agencies and partners are trying to get the most out of these relationships, how to get your agencies to do their best in everything they do. So what would be your advice for some of these folks?
Well, working with agency, I think is another form of finding the right way to work collaborative with people. For me, what has worked very well throughout my 20 over years of marketing life and business management life is that I don't treat agencies as agencies. I don't treat them as someone that has to answer to my brief and follow instructions. I think the respectful way that I've tried to do is to really treat them as partners, right? We are marketeers. We are not the creative people. That's what I always remind myself and remind my team, that while I have earlier said that the marketing work and role that we are doing has certain elements of creativity into it. But once we deal with agencies, we need to respect the creative is their core. They are the subject matter expert in that. Is the core value that agencies are part of our creative work. And we should focus on the business objectives whenever we work with them. Guide them, steer them so that they can achieve the business objective that they want, and let them perform their magic. That has worked very well for me so far. Thankfully, my relationship with all my agencies has always been that of very good respect and a very good cordial way of a partnership, such that we can talk about much better ways to improve the campaign. But most of the time, the angle of which I put in any comments is from the business side, such that they can bring in the best creative ideas into what we do. And I will again be able to help them develop something that serves and meet the business needs, but at the same time, on their end, be able to meet their own creative desires to get the most creative work, the best creative work out in the market for the client.
I think one thing that popped out when you were saying that is the word respect. And I think that is a testament to who you are as a professional. And probably why you have such successful relationships internally and externally is the mutual respect. Because you talked about, obviously, on the brand side, that you guys know the business objectives. The partner, the creative partner, should bring that creative magic to it. And they're going hand in hand. So I think that's something that you obviously have to respect both sides, and you can bring the best out of each other. I'm curious, because when it talks about like briefing, this is always a tricky question. How in depth do you go when it is a creative brief? Obviously, like you say, you need to share the specific business objectives, but what are your thoughts on briefs, best practices, particularly when it comes to creative?
Wow, I think brief needs to give the ability for the agency to try and explore whatever avenues that they feel is able to bring the message to the target audience. What is most important within the brief is to state your business objective very clearly, very clear target audience very clearly, and bring value to the brief by stating very clearly from the business perspective, a good understanding of the customer, the good understanding of the target audience. I think that is very clear. You have actually mentioned the brief, but in my experience, I think throughout the whole creative process, that is only the start of it, right? How eventually a good piece of marketing work comes about is the whole process. And most importantly, it's actually the feedback process. In fact, I think this kind of works both ways, right? Most of the time when we work with agency, I tend to choose the briefing format and template that they provide so that they're most comfortable with. We put in the content. And I think that is just to give them a sense of direction, a starting point. When we start to evaluate and see the first round or second round of creative work that is being proposed to you, I think that part is important. How do you provide the feedback? What's the right way of providing the feedback so that they're able to continue to build on those ideas quite quickly? And actually, on the contrary as well, as marketeers, let's don't waste the agency's time as well. And that's something I learned way back, very early part of my marketing life, that if you see in the first round, an idea just don't click, don't try to salvage it. If the idea really is, and you just feel that you just need the agency to relook at the whole thing, tell the agency so. Be nice to tell the agency why, and so that they don't waste time on a bad idea. And eventually you're still going to reject it, you're going to not like it, it's just wasting everybody's time. So if a bad idea comes to your table on the first juncture and you don't sense that it has the potential to develop into something better, say it, cue it fast, right? I think that to me has worked very well as well.
I like that approach of like just the candor, just saying, look, if this isn't going to work, and let's not waste our time, let's not waste your time with it. Let's figure out whether we scrap it or we reiterate or we do something different, but let's just talk about it early on. So I think that's really, really good advice, because I've seen some go into the late stages and then they just end up killing it, which obviously is a waste of time for both parties. So I think going back to that respect, that candor between both parties, sounds like it's super helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. In some ways, if you tell an agency that the idea is bad, it is a good respect of the agency so that you don't lead the agency wrongly into a stream of work that eventually that you don't like, you don't support wholeheartedly. And I think that itself is a good respect of the agency's time and resources poured into work.
Yeah, it reminds me of back when I was dating, long before I was married, and the girls I was interested in just say, hey, I'm not interested in you. It's okay, I get it.
All right, Joe, too much information.
Just kidding. So another thing, Prudential has won a lot of awards and accolades when it comes to the company culture. I know recently you guys were ranked third on LinkedIn's 2022 list of the top 15 companies in Singapore to grow one's career. I'd love to hear what goes into making a great workplace or company culture.
Yeah, I think firstly, we are very honored to be listed in by LinkedIn, to be ranked number 3 in terms of company culture. I think in the end, all companies, right, would have certain elements that dictate a culture. In fact, most companies will even put it on their walls and remind everybody, this is the culture, this is the purpose. Most important of all is how do we get people to live it? And this is where I have a very strong belief that the leaders have to set the tone. The leaders have to be the one that demonstrate it, leave, and make sure that their own behavior demonstrate what the value system that the company is talking about. They advocate and they actually steer certain company decision in all kind of debate and discussion within the company, such that it in the end serve what the company set out in their purpose. If it starts to deviate, and I think that's where if the walls say something, but the leaders behave in another way, it will never be believable by the staff. And I personally feel it in Prudential very strongly that my fellow peers, my colleagues, believe the values very strongly. The values are also being played back to us quite a lot in not just formal forum that introduce the values. We actually do practice it when we have discussion on the business, right? A discussion about marketing, that is this something about the customer? Is this something that shows ambition? Is this something that is for us to demonstrate courage in terms of what we do, or curiosity or empathy towards customers? All these are the values that we question when we have hard debates. When sometimes there are tension in the discussion, right? Everybody would have different points of view, which itself is a good thing, because then we don't come in as a company of folks that just have one idea. No, we have various debates and different ideas from different folks. We listen to them. We display empathy, right, in doing that, to listen to our own colleagues in understanding what they may have towards certain idea. But once we are able to take away any personal references to why you like this or personal biasness and question it based on the company values that we believe in. I think that really helps the discussion in a very constructive and fruitful way. And I think that is pretty much alive within Prudential in a lot of the discussions that I've seen. My fellow chief or whether it's the COO, CF, the CR, for example, will preach the same kind of values as I do. For one thing, all of them lead to customer centricity. And it's fantastic to hear my fellow CFO actually talks about, is this customer centric enough when it's supposed to be my job as a CCO? So that's great. That's great to hear. And once you have that common practice and common view and values that we live in, when the staff see it, I think a lot of the staff will actually believe and actually also live the values on their own. And that, to me, fosters a great culture throughout the company.
I think that's really good advice also in terms of managing internal friction, because like you said, in most organizations, you'll have different perspectives and thoughts on different things. But as you said, if you tie it back to your company values and use those kind of like checks and balances, then it moves away from I'm attacking someone other idea. It's asking the question, does this align with our company values? And if the question is no, then okay, going to rethink it. If it's yes, then let's talk about that more. So I think, like you said, it takes the personal kind of approach out of it and says, okay, we're all aligning on this ambition, we're all aligning on these company values. This is what we're working towards. So I think it's really good advice that not many folks, I'd like to see more folks do, especially in corporates.
Yeah, for those who listening in, do suggest that maybe you try that. You try that in your work environment with a colleague and said that, hey, instead of saying, no, I think you're wrong, they said, no, is this going to question whether this is in line with our values? I think that takes away immediately the immediate urge to defend one's idea, but evaluate from a very objective perspective. That has worked for me very well throughout my career life.
I think it's great advice, and I encourage everyone, like I said, to do it as well. Some really practical tips so far. Now, we'll switch gears a little bit because we talked about the corporate life and things like that. But obviously, in your role, and I'm sure a lot of folks watching and listening to today's episode are struggling with things like maybe burnout, or they need a break. So what are your advice when it comes to things like taking more career breaks, vacations, in order to remedy some of these kind of stress and burnout?
Do it, right? We're all human. We all need some time to go away from things that we do every day. Sometimes a good analogy, and perhaps a little bit cliche to mention this, is a lot of comparison has been done about us, people in the corporate world, as like hamsters. Sometimes we just run in the mill and we just keep running. It will be great. You can imagine that the hamster get out of that and you can enjoy the environment around it. I think that's, to me, the same analogy as taking the break. If you find yourself running in that running mill, get yourself out, take a few days break. I personally find that whenever I do that, I take a vacation, I go somewhere else, things that I see, people that I meet, people that I speak to, what they share from their life, their experiences, add a lot of value to my own perspective and gives me different ideas as well. And it's always good to always expose ourselves to different culture, because I think that opens up a whole new ability to absorb ideas, to see what's out there in other parts of the world. So please do that. I personally, pre-pandemic time, take at least 3 to 4 personal trips in some sense. I make sure that every year I would have one trip where I do it on my own. That's a solo trip. That's often to pursue very much my hobby in photography. I would have one with my wife, just the two of us, and the third one with my family, with my wife and my kids. So most often, at least 3 trips. Occasionally, I indulge myself with 2 solo trips so that I can take photographs in another country. And I think all these little breaks, particularly those that I would be on solo trips, are very good for reflection, to be on your own. Really take yourself away from all the hustle and bustle of your corporate life. And when you come back, I often feel very fresh with new ideas as well, fresh with great stories to share with people that again help with relationship building within your corporate environment. Talk to people about the photographs that I've taken, I share it with people and show it to people. All these are great conversation stuff, right? Yes, if you need a break, do take a break. Very helpful.
I need to take that as well too, because I'm one of those that tend to go nonstop. But I like the way you break it up. Like you said, you have maybe 1 or 2 solo trips. You have one with your wife, and then you have one with your kids. I think it's a nice way to break it up. Like I said, particularly when it comes to solo trips, because I have a wife and 2 young kids, so I won't be taking any solo trips anytime soon, unless it's for work. But yeah, I think if you can get those in as a leader, I think it's, like you said, good to reflect, recharge, and re-energize yourself. And you brought up another good point in terms of experiencing and learning about new cultures, because many of us who are watching or listening to today's episode are in regional roles. So we're maybe working with different markets. And if we haven't experienced that market, whether it's the food, the people, whatever it is, then it's a little bit difficult to come up with ideas for marketing and what's going to resonate with them. So I think that's some good advice on going, exploring some of these markets. Obviously not going there to just come with marketing ideas, but just immersing yourself in the local culture and then taking those stories back, inspiring your team, I think are some great advice.
Yeah, I do have some comments about regional work because I have been in regional work and global work before as well. Now that I'm in a local role, right, I do hope that people who are in the regional role sometimes understand and respect the perspective coming from the folks in the local roles. Because if I'm able to do it again, a regional role or global role again, I will always remind myself that in the end, the experts in the market sit in the local country. And we need to respect that. So to your point, I think it's good that if anyone is doing a regional role or a global role, do find yourself more opportunity to immerse in the local culture in those countries that you help to serve, because in the end, it's good to have appreciation so that when your local colleagues and your local stakeholders mention to you about certain behavior things about the country specifically, sometimes very special about the country, you are able to appreciate that, right? That helps you to have empathy towards them. Doesn't mean that you need to be the expert in the local market, because no matter what, we will not be the expert, right? The local guys are the expert. We have to remember that. I think that to me is important for anyone carrying out a regional role, because there's no way we can be experts of many countries. We can use the expertise in the local market to our ability to forge a program that works well for as many of the geographies that we can help to serve as much as possible. But we need to listen to the local guys.
Great advice. One thing I want to ask you, because I was actually having lunch with the head of marketing just an hour ago, and he's very much always been in a local Singapore-based role. And so his ambitions is to, like you, one day move into a regional role. So maybe what are some of the advice you would give to someone who's in a local role but wants to do more regional work? How do they transition between the two?
Well, be ready to take risks. Put your hand up when the opportunity comes about. Usually, I've gone from local to regional to global and come backward. So it's quite an interesting transition. And I love it. At least I've been there and done that before for regional and global work. And I still think that there is a certain sense of attraction about regional work, right? Because that gives you the ability to see a wider perspective, more geography. I totally understand all the attraction around such a role. So to try to get yourself into that, I think, is to firstly understand that what's the value add this regional role can add to the local market. Understand that very well. Then secondly, ask yourself as a person, what value add do you add to that role in what you do? Because you are assuming a role that is definitely important. If not, your company won't structure such a role in place regionally. But most often not, I have experience where regional folks tend to come in and may not add a lot of value, because it's not, in some ways, their intention not to add value. It's difficult if they see their role as I make all the decisions around the abuse. That's difficult. Again, back to my point that I mentioned just now, the local guys are the experts. They know their markets. They should know their markets well. Then understand for yourself in the regional role, what is your value add, and play that well. And then ask yourself as a person from your experience, how do you add to that value so that your local colleagues would see you with, I use the word as well again, respect, and happy to work with you, and do not see you as, I think the seasoned marketers will understand why I say. There's always this saying about the seagull flying in and mess around a little bit and then fly it off. don't be that. Don't be the seagull that does that. Come in as a regional person that can really help the local markets, such that if they're on their own, they may not be able to do it, whether it's cheaper, faster, or better. And if you're able to do that, then you can line yourself up in the regional role, because you're able to help the market do things, in that sense, easier, faster, and cheaper, right?
It's great advice. I'm going to tell my friend, don't be a seagull. He want to understand what that means. I'll forward this interview so he can get this advice. So super practical. TK, I know a lot of folks who haven't reached that CXO level yet. Maybe they're a marketing manager, they're marketing director or VP, and they want to go to the next level. Can you maybe take us through a little bit about your journey? How did you actually end up becoming a chief customer officer?
When I tell friends and sometimes new colleagues what I've have been doing in the past before my current position, I think a lot of people are shocked. Just for the quick record, right? I am not long, or have not spent that much time within the financial industry. This is like my 8th year. Before that, I was in the chemical industry, leading a business for a multinational company, and then after that, taking a global role. And before that, I was pretty much in the FMCG world, in different consumer goods as well, from beauty care to tobacco products and so on. So you spend across, there's nothing common around those industries. What is common is my marketing know-how, of which I took it and make it transferable. So how did I end up to a C-suite role eventually? I think is my own courage to sometimes take risks. Because in order for me to go into a new industry, you have to be courageous enough to say that, okay, I'm ready to learn things. I'm ready to even learn from very more junior staff, but seasoned practitioner in the industry, so that I can learn quickly. 2 is get ready to learn things, really roll up your sleeve and understand the ground as well once you get into those industries. Because once you open yourself up to different industries, I think naturally it's the magic of numbers, right? You open up yourself to more opportunities. And I see employers ready to do that these days. As I've said to, in fact, just last week to a few of the interns in Prudential, the industry lines are blurring. The industry lines are getting great. There isn't really a black and white industry these days. A company can shift out of their industry and pursue something totally new. And we've seen a lot of companies doing that very successfully. My classic example is Apple. It never started off as a mobile company. It's gone on from a personal computer company to a music company. And now we are using their devices and the gadgets in a lot of different parts of our life. So when employers and companies do that, they will appreciate staff coming from different expertise. Get ready to again explore new grounds, and perhaps that will give you the opportunity to pursue new experiences, new roles, and perhaps the C-suite roles as well. So my joining in my previous organization was OCBC Bank, which was a CMO role, was essentially that, right? I jumped off from a chemical industry to a bank with no banking experience, but the opportunity was there. And I do applaud my hiring managers then in OCBC for his willingness and their willingness to take me up as well, even though I have no banking experience. But what you as a candidate definitely need to show is that you're willing to learn, you're willing to take a few knocks along the way, and you are also ready to use your past experiences to good use, because employers will see that as you coming off with fresh new ideas that you bring on board, and they will want to hear them.
Really good advice. And obviously, there's some transferable skills and things you could apply. But like you said, raising your hand and taking risks. I think that brings us to one of the audience's questions. Thank you guys so much. One of the questions was, what do B2B marketers need to know? What's maybe a #1 skill or something they need to be in order to be successful as B2B marketers? What are your thoughts on that?
Even though we are B2B marketers, I think in the end, we need to remember that your products, your services will eventually go to a consumer. I think it's useful to understand the B2B and the to C route, how that takes form after you market to your client, your direct client, which is the B2B customer. How does that end up with the end consumer? I think that's important to appreciate, because again, if you understand that, you will be in some ways helping your customers reach out to his own consumer. So how do you help in that process? I think that's very important for us to understand. B2B customers in the end are also customers. Let's don't forget they're also consumers on their own. They walk the streets, they take the public transport, they drive their cars, they visit the supermarkets. So think about that, because whatever you do, sometimes as consumers, they would see it as well. So when you bear that in mind, all these different ways are ways to reach out to them as well.
Good reminder. I think many folks forget B2B is actually you're marketing to an individual behind that. You have to keep that in mind in all your communications. Another one in our question we have is from a fellow CMO. It says, what are some of your tips on how to communicate with the executive or leadership team?
I think that's a great question. Thanks for filling that. I think it goes back to what we spoke about extensively just now about culture, right? First, understand your culture. Is the culture a very healthy one, of which you can share views very openly and in a very transparent way? I will again reflect on what I experience now in my current workplace, which is a very open, very transparent culture. For one, I don't have my own desk. In Prudential Singapore, we hot desk everyone, including my boss, the CEO. None of us have a room. None of us have a fixed desk. So I think that breaks the hierarchy thinking and structure very well. So when that happens, communication follows. So to your question, how do I communicate? When you are in that culture, that helps you to communicate in a much more honest, authentic, transparent way. And I think that helps. And of course, that changes if you feel that your culture perhaps need to be paying a little bit more respect to hierarchy, and so be it, right? If that works, then you need to then follow that, right? So that you are able to ensure that your communication is most effective. Sometimes it works that way. If a certain culture depicts a certain respect for hierarchy, then follow that. But when you get into a one-on-one with a manager where you feel that the environment, because it's a one-on-one, is closed door, allows you to have a more transparent communication, then take the opportunity. Yeah, take the opportunity. And again, as I mentioned just now, if you again use the company values as a way to bring along your discussion, that helps a lot in communicating with others, whether it's some people at a very senior level or anybody else or your peers or fellow colleagues.
Really good advice. That's something I hadn't heard. I've asked this question tons of times. I haven't heard that advice, so I appreciate you sharing that. We're rounding up. Thank you guys so much for all the questions. Really appreciate it. Let's move on quickly to the lightning round.
Oh, wow.
So what is one resource that has had the biggest impact on your career?
People.
Okay.
And when I mean that at all levels, bosses, colleagues, and staff.
Awesome. What's your most successful, say, marketing channel or tool?
Word of mouth. I think in the end, good old word of mouth. If you have a good product out there, people will talk about it.
Absolutely. If you had to 10x the budget now, if you had 10x the budget you have now, what would you spend it on?
Back on the customers.
Sorry, what was that?
Back on the customers. I'll spend it back on the customers.
I think we'd love you. What is one marketing KPI that your CEO looks at regularly? CEOs in general look at regularly.
Customer satisfaction. I think there is more and more belief around customer satisfaction, customer centricity. And I'm glad if my boss thinks that way, because then we are actually focusing on the right elements that makes or break a business, the customers itself. I think I like it when bosses question me as a KPI on satisfaction of the customers or growth of customer numbers. I think those are important.
Once again, first time I've heard that answer, so I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think it goes back to, like you said, in terms of company values, client centricity. If you could ask one question to 100 of your peers, what would you ask them?
How do you get your budget increased from your CFO?
Good question. I'm sure many folks, especially now with we're going through economic downturn, would love the answer to that question, to answer that next time. TK, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all your insights. I had a great time and learned a lot, so thank you so much.
Joe, thanks for having me here.
Absolutely, always good to see you. And for everyone watching and listening, we really appreciate your great questions. We really appreciate you joining today's episode of CMO Confessions, powered by On24. We'll see you on the next episode coming soon.